When it comes to death in movies, games, literature, TV shows, or any form of media, it seems as though we have developed our own lexicon of how to show that someone will die. Whether it be intentional foreshadowing or not, this language has been used time and time again, even in some of the most popular media we know and love today, with very few exceptions or subversions. So today, please join me on my very first video essay as we discuss the ever lighthearted subject that is the language of death. Avengers Endgame is the highest grossing movie of all time, adored by many, made me cry in a movie theater, and ended an 11-year-long chapter of storytelling that all began with a billionaire playboy philanthropist fighting for his life. And the language of death is prominent in this film. Over the course of his journey, Tony Stark went from being a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist that owned a cutting-edge weapons company to being trapped in a cave and fighting for his life, to becoming the Iron Man we all know and love today. And it was in Avengers Endgame that I knew he would die. After Scott Lang comes back from the quantum realm and informs Black Widow and Captain America of how time works there, they go to see Tony Stark, now living his life in a cabin in the woods with his wife Pepper, who's been with him since the beginning of his journey, and his young daughter, Morgan. This was my first indication that Tony Stark might not be alive by the time the credits rolled. Throughout his story, Tony Stark has been shown as a character who is willing to give his life for the greater good time and time and time again. But now, he had a reason to not risk his life. He had a wife, a daughter, a family, a home. He had finally found the peace he had been searching for. But when it came down to it, Tony was unable to let the hero part of himself go. He felt he had to don the armor and save the world one last time. This was Tony's version of being called in for one last job, which often results in that very character dying in the process. Often when an action hero retires from saving the world, there is a story where they are called back in for one last job. For example, Logan. And by the end of the story, that hero has usually met an untimely end, unable to go back to the peace they once had because they're in a better place. Once again, Logan. And while this gave some indication that Tony wouldn't be alive by the end of this movie, there was an even larger indicator later on. After failing to succeed in their time travel experiments, Steve Rogers steps outside to get some air. Tony Stark arrives with some witty banter and a desire to save the world, and he says this: "I gotta tell you my priorities. Bring back what we lost, I hope, yes. Keep what I found, I have to, at all costs. And maybe not die trying would be nice." This was the line that really cemented it for me. There seems to be a common practice in storytelling that when a character talks about their desire to not die, ironically, they are going to be the character that dies by the end of the story. And this is the fate of Tony Stark that we see play out in Avengers Endgame. After battling through time and space to bring back all they've lost, and coming face to face and fist to fist with the man who was responsible for killing half the entire universe, and in order to save the universe from losing half of all life again, he gives his own life. His wife holding him in his arms one last time, telling him he can finally rest. Secondly, also within Avengers Endgame, towards the start of the movie, Natasha reflects on her past life before joining the Avengers, which was definitely a red flag for her possible end. Often when a character talks about how much they care about their new family, or how much they don't want to lose them, they will often be a character to die, almost as if they know about their upcoming demise, and they're now going to take the time to reflect upon their journey and the friends they've made along the way. Another scene that was an indicator occurred at one of the biggest points of the film. Just before going back in time, Black Widow says, "See you in a minute," which was unfortunately not true, as she gave her own life on the planet Vormir in order for the remaining Avengers to get the Soul Stone. I don't really know how to describe this, but it seems that whenever a character talks about how they can't wait to see their friends, or seems to have plans after what they are currently doing reaches its end, they will most likely perish before any of those things can happen. Or they end up being badly injured, but surviving just long enough to see their friends again, and then dying. Take for instance the movie Armageddon. Bruce Willis's character goes into space in order to plant a bomb on an asteroid and blow it up to save not only Earth, but his daughter. His entire motivation is to save his daughter. But after a series of events that renders the remote detonation of the bomb useless, Bruce Willis must go to the bomb and detonate it himself, sacrificing himself and any chance of seeing his daughter again, for her. For another interesting example of this, as well as a subversion of this, let us now look at The Last of Us Part 2. Death is no stranger in the Last of Us franchise, often managing to be quite crucial to the stories told within it, and throughout the nearly 60 hours of playtime you'll get from these games, The Last of Us Part 2 manages to subvert some of these tropes in ways I did not expect, while also playing into some of them directly. For starters, let's look at the dialogue from when Ellie and Dina enter the movie theater. After running and hiding and surviving through the post-apocalyptic wasteland that is Seattle, Ellie and her friend Dina enter an abandoned movie theater, and after talking about how neither of them want to become infected, Dina says, "I'd hate to have to shoot you in the face." When I heard this line, I thought two things. Firstly, I thought back to what we talked about with Iron Man, and that this character just openly talked about the possibility of death, so I was worried Dina was going to die. Secondly, it made me presume that they would flip their own statement around, and that at some point you, as Ellie, would have to shoot Dina in the face, which I figured would be an interesting, yet upsetting twist. But I was wrong. By the time the credits rolled, Dina seems fine. Her relationship with Ellie might be in shambles, but she seems to be alive. And that was interesting to see a character that felt as though, and even somewhat hinted at the possibility they would at some point be murdered for shock value or emotional suspense, or to strengthen Ellie's resolve, was fine by the time the story ended. Now let's look at how The Last of Us plays exactly into what I've been talking about. Owen and his pregnant girlfriend, Mel, have been hearing reports of a group in Santa Barbara, California, and they have a boat ready to go. One of the newer characters, Lev, has taken a different boat and headed off towards his home island. Yara, his sister, and Abby, who you're currently playing as, and is the game's primary antagonist to Ellie, both go after him. Owen wishes to come along as well, but is stopped by Abby, saying, "Mel needs you." Abby and Yara rush off towards the island, leaving Owen, Mel, and their dog, Alice, alone. That is, until Ellie shows up. Ellie, driven by her bloodlust to end Abby and her friends, arrives at where she thinks Abby will be, at the Seattle Aquarium, the very same aquarium where Owen and Mel and Alice are. After sneaking around the mostly abandoned aquarium and crawling through some vents like she's in Die Hard, Ellie falls out of a vent and is attacked by Alice. Ultimately, Ellie defeats Alice and continues to make her way through the aquarium. And then, Ellie comes face to face with Owen and Mel. And then, after attempting and failing to find out where Abby is, unfortunately ends up killing both of them. This is another example of what we were talking about with Black Widow. While Natasha was ready to save the world and see her friends again, Owen and Mel were ready for a somewhat normal life. And in both these scenarios, they were very, very, very close to getting just what they wanted. But whether it be storytelling or fate, none of these characters got the happy ending they wanted. Not Tony, not Natasha, not Owen, not Mel, none of them. Their story ends in the same place, in the same moment their life does. Obviously, this is not the culmination of all that there is to say on the language of death in storytelling, but I really wanted to highlight these specific elements and examples because these are the ones that I've seen done and used the most. So thank you for listening to me ramble on about the deaths of fictional characters for nearly 10 minutes. I hope you enjoyed.